All right, and here we go. We're going to continue with chapter 10.2. We left off with the Louisiana Purchase, and the next logical step is to talk about Lewis and Clark and their famous expedition of 1804 to 1806. All right, so a little bit of review today to start off. We were talking about the Louisiana Purchase. If you remember, the Louisiana Purchase was something that was a giant piece of land that was bought by the United States from Napoleon of France in 1803. And if you look down here at this map on the lower right side, highlighted in green is this giant area of land that we got from France. It's all this land that is west of the Mississippi River. This line that I'm tracing right here is the Mississippi River. So all this area right here. So that land is huge. It includes all or parts of 15 states from down here in Louisiana all the way up into Montana. We got this gigantic piece of land for $15 million. And for that small price, the United States doubled in size. A lot of times you're going to hear historians or just fans of history refer to this single transaction between France and the United States as the greatest real estate deal in all of history. So we're going to explore why people say that starting right now. All right, so just to kind of highlight how big the Louisiana Territory was, here's some numbers over here, really, really stunning numbers. It's 827,000 square miles. Okay, big time. Right here, 530 million acres of land. And we got it for $15 million. If you average that up per acre, all that means is that all we paid for is 3 cents per acre. What a steal. So we're going to put that in some terms that you might understand and make it more relatable to you. So Verona, the town that we all live in, or at least the town that most of us live in, some live in Fitchburg, some might live in Madison. It's the entire town of Verona, or city of Verona, is 4,800 acres in size. So if you wanted to buy an area of land the size of Verona at Louisiana Purchase prices, you could buy the entire gigantic piece of land that Verona sits on. It would only cost you $144. That's how cheap the land was for the Louisiana Purchase. Dirt cheap, you might say. All right, the Lewis and Clark expedition. So here's the thing. The United States has doubled in size with the purchase of the Louisiana Territory, but what did Thomas Jefferson really pay for? Nobody really knew. See, there weren't a lot of Americans out in that area, that Louisiana Territory, and it would take an expedition or a journey into the area by some very, very brave people to discover what types of plants, animals, and people inhabited this vast area. That's Thomas Jefferson right there. Remember, he's the one that was so unsure of himself. Did he have the authority in the Constitution to purchase land from another country? Did he or didn't he? Well, he went ahead and did it anyway. So the Lewis and Clark expedition, knowing that this area needed to be mapped and charted, Thomas Jefferson chose his friend and fellow Virginian Captain Meriwether Lewis. This is Meriwether Lewis right here on this side, to lead the expedition into the Louisiana Territory. So Lewis knew it was going to take more than one person to do this, so he asked a friend of his named William Clark, who was an expert mapmaker and outdoorsman, to help lead a group of volunteers into the unexplored land. And history remembers this group of people as the Corps of Discovery. There's about 40 people total in the Corps of Discovery. There's William Clark right here. All right, so the journey begins in St. Louis. Now, we don't say Missouri. Missouri wasn't yet a state, but it's in the city of St. Louis now, or where the city of St. Louis is now. Good baseball there, by the way. All you Brewers fans are jealous. I know that. So they begin in St. Louis in spring of 1804. And they're going to travel up this river right here, this red river that I'm tracing on this map. That is the Missouri River. It is one of the longest rivers in the world, especially when you tack on this part down here that is the Mississippi, the lower Mississippi River. One of the largest river systems in the world. So they travel against the current, by the way, on this leg of the journey, all the way up until they get to Fort Mandan. Fort Mandan is where they spend the winter of 1804. Now looking over here, what are they doing on this trip? One of the things they're doing is, in addition to charting and mapping out the Louisiana Territory, they're still looking for an all-water route to the Pacific. And along the way, Lewis and Clark, we know so much about this expedition because they kept journals that documented what they saw and what they learned about the uncharted land. Clark, of course, made really, really accurate maps, and the group tried as hard as they could to establish positive relationships with the Native American tribes that they encountered along the way, along this journey. So this is a bigger, less transparent version of the map from the previous slide. So here's where they started in St. Louis, and they're going up against the flow of this river, against the current, up the Missouri River, and they make it to here by that first winter. So the Corps of Discovery made it to Fort Mandan, or the Mandan villages, in what's now North Dakota, and they spent the winter of 1804, 1805 there. This is where we're going to meet somebody who's very, very famous in history. They stayed with the Mandan tribe, and in the spring of 1805, when weather permitted, they got going again. Now, after that winter, they're joined by a French-Canadian trader named Charbonneau and his teenage wife, Sakakawea. We used to call her, when I was growing up, we would say Sacagawea, but Sakakawea seems to be the way people pronounce it now. So Sakakawea is really, really important to this expedition. That's probably why she's remembered so fondly in history. One thing that she was important, or what made her so important, was that she was from the Shoshone tribe. She could speak several Native American languages and could communicate with multiple tribes. She knew the land and the geography, and she knew what foods were safe to eat. The expedition realized that at some point they were going to need horses to be able to cross the enormous Rocky Mountains. The keel boat and the canoes they had were not going to be very, very useful or effective in the mountains. They needed horses. So when they reached Shoshone lands, Sakakawea discovered that the chief of that tribe was her brother, and she was able to get horses for the trip across the Rocky Mountains. So after all this struggle, the Corps of Discovery finally reached the Pacific Ocean in November 1805. They spent the winter on the Pacific coast before beginning the trip home. They made it back to St. Louis in 1806. Well, what did they accomplish? They never did find an all-water route across the continent. Oh, why? Well, there isn't one. There's no all-water route across the continent to be found. You're going to have to portage your boats at some point and maybe have horses. Well, now we have highways and things, so it's not that much of an issue anymore. But they did succeed at mapping the Louisiana Territory, though. Here's some really cool facts about the Lewis and Clark expedition. The journey was about 8,000 miles round trip. Another cool fact is, even with little knowledge of the area and primitive mapping tools, William Clark, we said earlier that he was an expert map maker, he calculated the distance they had traveled, and he was only off by 40 miles. The trip lasted 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days. Now listen to this one. This is really staggering right here. The men of the Corps of Discovery, because of all the energy that they were using up during the day, they ate between 8 and 10 pounds of meat each day per person. And then only one member of the Corps of Discovery died along the way. So that is the Lewis and Clark expedition. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Stay strong.